Hello, my name is Marcus. Hold on a sec. I don't know if you can see him, but there's a seal. Actually, he's looking this way. And he just ducked under. Okay. So that's the second time we've seen the seal so far. The companion animals to this series. Oh, there he is. Okay. So the companion animals to this series are the heron, the mosquito, the blue jay, the fox, and the crow. And once in a while the seal makes an appearance. If we're lucky, we'll see the Canada geese. So hello again, my name is Marcus. I'm the compiler of a collection of therapy quotes entitled 1001 Windmills of the Mind. This is TQ 1259 to 1263. So TQ1, or therapy quote number 1, up to 1001 represent the core collection of 1001 Windmills of the Mind. And all of the quotes beyond 1001 are the bonus quotes. But the bonus quotes add to our material on the core collection. And there are roughly 25 threads or themes or topics that run throughout the series. And we've even started a new topic in the bonus material on the psychology of religion. So may I refer you to yesterday's video? We covered a little bit about that. Before we get into today's quotes, I want to follow up on yesterday's quote, which was a big question mark for me. And so yesterday there was a quote where she was talking about, the adult personality versus, let's use Robert Bly's phrase, the sibling society. And her theory is that long ago, before agriculture, when people roamed around, her theory is that babies were raised properly. That when the baby came out, she was placed around the mother's belly, and the baby was able to receive the attunement of his mother. In other words, the baby could get his extended womb needs met properly. The mother was attuned, and this, so we're calling this a secure attachment style. And with the secure attachment style, the child receives a psychological birth, roughly at the age of 3. That's one of the threads in this series, the idea of a psychological birth. Mahler's idea is that the psychological birth doesn't automatically take place with the biological birth, that there's sort of a process between the physical birth and the psychological birth. And she describes this process as the separation individuation process, which goes through various phases. That extended womb phase, called the symbiosis, and then the differentiation phase, the practicing phase, the rapprochement phase, and then whole object relations. And assuming all of that takes place, the child feels safe enough to deconstruct his life force from the image of his mother, and it goes to himself. And when that happens, the child has access to the real self part of him with various capacities, as discussed in previous videos. So that's another thread, Masterson's concept of the real self part of the self with its various capacities. Just a crow. But hopefully we'll see the heron. They're very sensitive birds. So yesterday's quote, we don't have all the evidence, right? At least I didn't read the whole thing, but she claims that before agriculture, roughly 15,000 years ago, mothers raised their babies properly, and those babies grew up to become adults, and they developed an adult temperament. She says here, generous, calm, content, humble, kind, autonomous, and friendly. She says that's some of the characteristics of the natural adult, and that's what naturally takes place with enough love. And then she says, when farming was discovered, people settled down, and that changed things. And then the way children were raised also changed. Oh, just a seagull there. Mostly crows and seagulls. Let's read the quote from yesterday's. This was yesterday's quote, TQ 1245. Okay, so the preface was adult society as opposed to current sibling society. So in the past there was adult society. She claims for 150,000 years humans functioned like, as we now understand, an adult, how an adult would function. Generative, I'm okay, you're okay, and so on. Okay, so prior to the emergence of agricultural settled societies, they live in highly cooperative but fluid groupings with deep values of egalitarianism and sharing. And this could be observed all over the world, in any continent, in any place. It was the same. Humans were generous, calm, content, humble, kind, highly autonomous, and highly communal. Okay? So this was before agricultural, before settling down on the farms, right? But then this changed things. Species-atypical child raising seeds underdeveloped and even skewed human nature and morality. The resulting misdeveloped adults create societies that perpetuate the undercare of children, fostering communities of people with neurobiologically framed paranoiac perceptions. So she's saying that's when children began to develop an insecure attachment style. Because, okay, so this is why I want to follow up on it. So may I refer you to yesterday's video. Sorry about the glare here. Can you still see me? Oh, is that better? Okay. Yeah, the quality of my the videos sort of varies throughout the series. The focus is on the material, the quotes. All of these quotes, by the way, come from the psychoanalytic perspective. The psychoanalytic perspective just simply talks about how the way we were raised influences how we see things in the present, and the patterns that develop, and the repetition compulsion, and so on. For example, with an insecure attachment style. So yesterday I just randomly speculated, maybe when farming took place, maybe the kids were left behind sometimes, and then the woman went out, because now there's property, and now there's we don't know exactly. So something changed, and she theorizes that children were raised differently from the onset of agricultural settled societies, roughly 15,000 years ago. And this change in the way we raised children made the children, she says here, underdeveloped and even skewed. Okay, that's the insecure attachment style, resulting in misdeveloped adults. And these misdeveloped, arrested development, because the mother didn't offer a secure attachment style for some reason. These misdeveloped adults then go on to create societies that perpetuate the undercare of children, because now you're caught in this new way, I guess. Let's see. And then the competition comes in, and people come. So this is not about developmental psychology, really. But I just sort of came across this quote in reference to Arrested Development. So it's a theory. So she's saying that for 150,000 or for 200,000 or for however long it was, humans were calm, content, humble, generous, kind, autonomous, communal. Yes, they had rituals, they had their ways of dealing with anxiety, and they had their practices, but they didn't, but it was, benign that way. She said maybe there was jealousy sometimes, but like if someone took someone's wife or something. But the tribes didn't fight with each other, she says. They weren't like that. This tribal stuff, as we understand it, sort of took place afterwards. Again, huge question mark. Let me just go to the quotes. So why I'm doing this follow-up. Okay, the follow-up is. Okay, so I'm going to post two short quotes on serotonin and dopamine that I just came across. So it's a what-if situation. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that humans in the past, babies were raised properly. See, that's Lloyd DeMaz's argument. He says he has a thing called psychohistory. If you want to understand history, look at the way children were raised. And he said that children were raised very poorly, and we had a lot of problems from that. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that before agricultural, babies were raised properly, and they got a secure attachment style. And then the farming settled in. Now what if, with the farming, this affected our dopamine? Okay? So just a quick comment, so just very briefly, dopamine for the chase, serotonin from the catch. So, as I understand it, we're talking about from the mammalian brain's point of view, okay? From the old brain, the limbic system and all that. So from the monkey brain, let's say. So from the mammalian brain's point of view, right? So humans have a neocortex, right? But underneath, there's still that residue, right? The mammalian brain. So from the mammalian brain's point of view, when it receives, hold on. When it receives something that allows the mammalian brain to feel safe, the mammalian brain sends the person, the organism, a serotonin. That's the I'm safe, I feel good. Now, whatever this item is, it could be food, could be now from the mammalian brain's point of view, status does that. If a person's in the one-up position, they feel safer. They have more mates, they have more food, so they feel safer, right? So then the brain sends the person serotonin. Now, the pursuit of getting these status items, whatever they may be, is called dopamine. So dopamine for the chase, so it's exciting. It's exciting because you think that when you get the item, the trophy, the reward, whatever it is, the status symbol, you're excited. So dopamine is the feeling of excitement, anticipation, expectation, right? And then when you get the item, then you feel your brain sends you serotonin. Okay, now that's from the mammalian brain's point of view. Now think about psychic structure. If the person's psychic structure is I'm okay, you're okay, this really isn't an issue too much. But if the person is caught in the the narcissistic pattern, they think I'm okay and you're not okay. They've identified with the aggressor. They reject their unloved self, project or see their unloved self, their despised self onto others, and then put others down because they felt put down by their mothers. So they're doing to others what their mother did to them. So they're caught in the constant state of wanting to be in the one-up position because they've identified with the aggressor. Now, the mother was one-up over the baby. The mother did have a higher status and power over the baby. And unfortunately, maybe she took advantage of it to meet her needs, not to blame her, but then to deal with the stress of that, the baby identified with the aggressor. So that's a narcissistic pattern. So if the psychic structure is the narcissistic pattern, image of the self, image of the other is fused, so there may be that constant Sisyphus repetition compulsion of always chasing, wanting more, better, and so on. So advertising always capitalizes on that aspect of it, right? So long ago, there was this I'm okay, you're okay. So there wasn't this issue. But when we discovered farming, what if that was an overstimulation of the system? What if that kind of regressed us a little bit because it was too stimulating? And when it's too stimulating, maybe it made us regressed to that mammalian brain. And then from the farming, then we became always wanting to chase and compete and have a higher status, and then the global pillage came along, and then the prejudiced personality, and you see. So all of this is because there's a thread in this series on the prejudiced personality, right? Oh, hold on. No? Okay. Hoping we'll see the heron. So one of the major threads throughout this series is prejudice. And all along we've been talking about the psychology, the individual psychology of prejudice, right? If the child has to repress too much of his real feelings and denies it, and then he feels unloved, he may see others, he may project the rejecting mother onto others and then be angry towards that way. Or he may identify with the aggressor and do to others what his mother did to him. So we've been saying that the insecure attachment style, relational trauma, arrested development, the repression, which leads to splitting leads to projection, and then the rationalizations leads to prejudice, and then there's further rationalizations to justify it, because the person is protecting the grandiose self-image, so they're very invested in that image. And then there's double think around it, where they feel like the victim while they're victimizing. So two videos ago talked about Grotstein's quote on projective identification about the Siamese twins. So I recommend that. This video that I'm making now, the past couple of videos sort of is the background to this video. So I hope to get the best value of this video, in my opinion, please refer to the past couple of videos, at least the past two, let's say. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of dopamine. So my question is, if we discovered farming, boom, there's a sudden reward. There's this sudden boost of great safety with all this free food, let's say. So that overstimulated the serotonin. Now, when the serotonin comes, it's always fleeting. Now we repeat that. It's like we get addicted almost, and then we repeat it. And then the child rearing relates to perpetuating, you see. So let's back up a sec. So here's the quote on dopamine. Okay. The motivating power of dopamine was suddenly clear to me when I stumbled upon the spinach study. Monkeys were trained to do a task in exchange for a spinach leaf, and then offered juice instead of spinach. The monkeys' dopamine soared. Juice is a high reward to the non-verbal brain, the mammalian brain, right? Because sugar meets caloric needs much more than spinach. But after 4 days of juice, the dopamine stopped. It had already done its job. I saw how dopamine motivates us to keep looking for better ways to meet needs. And I saw how expectations get wired, neurons, right, get wired by experience, so a reward is soon taken for granted instead of sparkling joy, or sparking the chase, right? Or sparking, I'm not sure about that. Okay, but there's more. The researchers switched back to spinach instead of juice. The monkeys flew into a rage and threw the spinach back at the white lab coat researchers. You can imagine that, right? And so on. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. Right? So it wired the brain. So when we discovered farming, we now realize that farming gets us the reward. Now our brain is set. Now we're going to constantly get the reward. But the dopamine did its job. Okay. So now we have to look for another reward. So those farms became cities, countries, civilization, you know, and expands like that, right? So, and along with that, the overstimulation maybe then created stress because of the worry of not getting the reward. Because, right? I'm not explaining this well. Something happened that led to what's called the insecure attachment style, where children don't achieve the psychological birth. Now that's the foundation for the psychological birth, having a secure attachment style. Because with the secure attachment style, there's what's called whole object relations. I'm okay, you're okay, and that leads to the adult personality, right? And with the access to the real self. Okay, so let's just add on. Okay, so just related to that, let's just clarify this serotonin idea. Okay, serotonin. The one-way mirror study showed me how serotonin motivates us to strive for social importance despite our best intentions. Researchers put an alpha monkey on one side of a one-way mirror and his subordinates on the other. The alpha made his usual dominance gestures, but the others didn't respond with typical submission gestures because they couldn't see him. It was a one-way mirror. He got very agitated by being ignored and kept trying to command their attention. Okay, this is the monkey brain, right? This is the narcissistic pattern, right? Okay, his serotonin went down and his cortisol went up. Okay, there we go. The cortisol went up. That would lead to the insecure attachment style. When the mother is stressed out. When the mirror was removed and he got the usual deference, okay, his serotonin went back up. Okay, and so on. And she says this. And she says that some people don't like this idea. She goes on about it. Even though it was reported in the major newspapers and all that. Let me try it a different way. Hold on a sec. Okay, this was my original question mark. Okay, was the discovery of agriculture juice? Okay, so remember the spinach leaf and the juice. So the natural food is what's wild, right? The whole in its original state. Right? But juice, we take out the pulp and we concentrate and we extract the liquid. So it's concentrated. Now some people say when you concentrate something out of something, that the concentrate of it, it's exaggerated, like it's not really in its original natural state. And depending on the degree to which this is done, it can act closer and closer towards it resembling having like a drug-like effect, you know? And we're not saying juice is we're not saying that, but it's the idea that when something, the more concentrated something is. So, so we all know that a can of cola has 10 spoonfuls of sugar in it. So this is highly stimulating. So that's not its natural state. So as an analogy, humans were eating fruits and berries and all that, greens and right, and let's assume they ate meat as well, according to their needs. Was the advent of agricultural, was that like juice? Was it like a concentration? We could grow more than nature would naturally provide. Was there like a concentration? Like in this quote here, from spinach leaf to juice, right? Okay, so was the discovery of agriculture, quote, juice, overstimulation of dopamine, which, quote, regressed us to less rely on our mid-prefrontal cortex, where the adult is, and more to the mammalian brain, which in turn led to altered child-raising practices where species-atypical child-raising seeds underdeveloped and even skewed human nature and morality. The resulting misdeveloped adults create societies that perpetuate the undercare of children, fostering communities of people with neurobiologically framed paranoiac perceptions. Okay, so just we can link this to our thread of prenatal trauma. So we've established a thread on prenatal distress syndrome, right? And that can predispose a child or foreshadow birth trauma. So if there's too much stress there, then the child doesn't really bond. So how does he bond? If he's frightened, he hallucinates that his mother's good and he's bad. Now, because of magical thinking, he has to preserve his magical thinking to keep his loyalty attachment to the good mother that he's fantasizing about. You see? So that's the narcissistic pattern right there. He has to always project the bad or be the bad to be loyal to the frightening mother, which he denies. That's called the splitting defense mechanism, and then he thinks it's all good. That's called the splitting defense mechanism. Now, babies temporarily use the splitting defense mechanism up to the age of 3. When they're older, things get sorted out. The baby develops, I'm okay, and you're okay. Now, in the beginning, so a couple of videos ago, there's a very good quote about Fairbairn's theory of the moral defense by Jeff Ray. Right? So, no mother's perfect, that's okay. But temporarily, what the child does is he thinks that he will take it upon himself to think that he's bad and his mother's good, because the baby has to think the mother is good to have an attachment. He can't think that the mother's bad. He can't handle that. The only way he can handle his need to have an attachment to the mother is to think that the mother's good. So he takes it upon himself to think that he's bad and his mother's good. That's the I'm not okay, mother's okay, and the baby thinks he's not okay. Right? Now if that gets stuck there, he always feels responsible. You know, the codependent patterns like that, they feel responsible for everything. They think it's their fault, even though it's not. You know, and they're stuck there because the magical thinking makes them think that they're responsible. So that can be the savior complex there, the martyr complex, whatever. In a more severe case, if there's more severe trauma than that, there's identification with the aggressor. Okay, just a large crow there. But we have a nice day here. You want to have a look? So the much more severe trauma is when the baby cannot accept that he's not okay and his mother's okay. He identifies with the aggressor. He loses himself completely. He becomes the mother. He's the mother now. Now he thinks he's okay because he's the mother. And what about him? What about his true self? His true self was from the baby's perspective. The true self was despised, hungry, enraged part self, devalued, unloved. He denies it. Okay, he maintains his magical thinking. That's the grandiosity, and he's fused with the omnipotent mother. So now he thinks he's so important and entitled, and he's above himself. But he projects himself outwardly. So that's the I'm okay and you're not okay. Meaning, he's trying to tell others that his mother was in the one okay position and he was not, and he was in the one down position, in the not okay position. It was too painful. So what he did was he identified with the aggressor. So a person with a narcissistic pattern, when they're devaluing others, putting others down, using others, exploiting others, thinking all these negative, these rationalizations, and they're charming maybe. So they're trying to say that their mother exploited them. Right? So it's repetition, compulsion gone awry. Again, when there's a trauma, the person tries to recreate, repeat, relive, try to master, but he's stuck there. It's like a Gordian knot in the labyrinth. He's stuck there. Right? So the idea is to be aware of all this. Right? Okay, maybe I'll just, maybe I'll come back. I'd like to revisit this because I don't feel I was able to express it well enough. But the quote is posted below, and a very good resource is the work of Loretta Brunning. She has a book called Habits of the Happy Brain. That book used to be called Meet Your Happy Chemicals, and she describes dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So in other words, farming, ironically, was too exciting, and from there, somehow, the babies weren't raised normally. They were stressed. These stressed babies grew up and perpetuated the stressed situation. Okay. And now, roughly, according to one study, 50% of all children in North America achieve an insecure attachment style. They don't achieve the psychological growth, and they're caught in the repetition compulsion of either being in the codependent pattern, the narcissistic pattern, the hostile provocative attachment style, or some of those schizoid patterns. They're just removed and detached. A severe version of it is that Iago character, where he just sits back and he doesn't have greed. He doesn't even have greed anymore. He only has envy. He only has envy. And that's the Iago character. And he spreads rumors and pits people against themselves, and he sits back and enjoys. Now, in the comic series, the 1955 comic series called Psychoanalysis, okay, as mentioned in a previous video, there's a character in that comic series. By the way, it's not an entertainment. It's primarily a demonstration of the therapy process put in comic book format. There's a character in there called a guy named Freddy. His dad was hard on him. His mother was being inappropriate, and he was enraged. One day, he managed to get his parents to argue amongst themselves, and he sat back and enjoyed the show. So he was on the verge of becoming an Iago character. So the Iago character, he's the one where he didn't get love from his father, nor his mother, not proper love. And the only relief he got was to see them argue amongst themselves. Then he felt a breather from that. So he developed Schadenfreude from that. And it's severe, sometimes it's called emotional sadism. We're just normally saying Schadenfreude. He enjoys suffering of his parents, and he sits back and enjoys the show, kind of thing. Speaking of show, not much of a show here today. I did a video, the last video was interesting. There was a heron sitting right beside me, and the whole time I didn't even notice it. I thought that was nice. Okay, I keep hoping I'm gonna come around and offer a nice summary of this idea. I think I'm stuck in a loop here a little bit. So I'll leave it up to you, the viewer, to figure it out. What do you think? What do you think about TQ 1245? Okay, combined with the ideas of dopamine and serotonin, and how settling down may have changed our neurochemistry, creating more stress, right? And what about the theory that is there something to it? Is it worth pursuing? Like, is this a line of thought that's worth looking further into, right? There's a lot to unpack with this. Definitely, there's so much there. You know, her question here, Narvaez, is it? Her question was, you know, where did humans go wrong? At what point did we stop? At what point did we start raising our children improperly? And she says at the beginning of agriculture. That's what she's saying. It's an interesting argument, because others have made similar arguments about this. You know, the natural state of affairs for humans was, no one's saying we go back to that, was that we just ate spinach, let's say, and we roamed around peacefully and we were relaxed about it. There was no overstimulation of dopamine and serotonin. You know. So this is Browning's point. If you understand those two, dopamine and serotonin, it can explain a lot. Now, what we're saying here in 1001 Windmills of the Mind, this all is influenced by the mind, the psyche, the psychic structure. The psychic structure, the mind operates the brain. The brain takes instructions from the psyche. Okay, so we're not just the brain. So there's even a book called "You Are Not Your Brain." That's the name of a thick book. It says "You Are Not Your Brain." Okay, so we're not. We're more than our brain. We have a psyche, right? And we want this psyche to be to reflect a psychological birth of whole object relations, image of the self as whole, image of the other as whole, and there's differentiation there. So the fusion got resolved, the splitting got resolved, no more projective identification, no more reaction formation, no more infantile megalomania, no more magical thinking. Now remember, religion promotes all of those things, so that's something to keep in mind. Right? All of these immature infantile defense mechanisms that the baby desperately uses during those first few years, they all become existential hearsay by the age of 3. With enough love, the child achieves the adult personality: calm, content, humble, reasonable. Right? They have their. When the baby's loved, he's loving. He sees the world in a realistic way. Right? The world is beautiful, and when you're loved, you see the reality of the beautiful world. Now, when the baby's unloved, he's hurt and angry, and then he projects the frightening mother onto the world. That's the paranoiac perception she was saying here. You know? And I remember the original goodness was the breast. So if the breastfeeding is good, and they internalize that good experience, we live in two worlds. We live in the internal world and the external world. But how we see the external world is filtered by how our internal world is like. Now, if in the internal world we have that sense of experience of the outer being good, because the original outer was the breast. So the first outer was the breast and it was good. Now that we have the memory of that, then we see the outer in general as good. You know? So hate is not natural. Hate is just the byproduct of when the love is not, when something goes awry. baby's not loved, then he's angry. Then there's the anger. Anger's only in response to when the baby is not getting his love needs met because he's frightened. Okay, I think I'll just have to leave it at that. Hope you'll... I really wish I could have delivered this more smoothly and more succinctly. I'm going to revisit this in future videos. So I sort of need to do this because what happens is when I ramble on later, afterwards, I'm going to think about how could I have presented that better, and then maybe in a future video I will deliver it in a better way. So I need to go through this sort of messy process to get the final polished quote. Let's move on then. TQ 1259. But I have to confess, I find it fascinating, this whole idea. Remember in that comedy, in that cartoon movie Inside Out, the baby didn't want spinach? Remember? Was it Riley, the kid in the movie called Inside Out? About the emotions. The child just wanted sugared cereal. He didn't want the spinach. You see, so already, the natural was the spinach, let's say. But the brain adjusted to the sugar, and it couldn't go back. The sugar offered too much reward for the mammalian brain, and it was frightening to go back to less reward. So the brain got too wired. It's called dopamine habituation. It got habituated there. So the neural net, so the baby was caught in her existential net. How does she, So I think children need whole foods, natural foods. I don't think little babies should be drinking all these sugary things. Ideally, right? Okay. I find myself clinging to this topic, still hoping for a better outcome. Okay, let's just move on. TQ 1259 offers some examples of interpretations. Right? Now, ideally, an interpretation links the client's chief complaint in life with where he learned it in childhood, with how it's being reenacted in the here and now, in the present. That's called a complete interpretation. But not all interpretations have to be complete like that. So this thing you're complaining about in your life, you learned it as you described in your childhood, and that's why in the present you're doing this. That's sort of a complete interpretation. That movie, I Love Huckabees, has an example of it. So here are a couple of examples of sort of interpretations that are not fully complete, but they're still helpful, I think. Okay, the therapist says, quote, "Let's try to understand the meaning of that remark," unquote. Okay, so this sentence facilitates mutual engagement more effectively than, "What did you mean by that?" Likewise, the statement, quote, "We need to know more about why feeling close or intimacy makes you freeze up." Okay, so this is more conducive to collaboration than "Why did you stop talking?" or "What made you freeze?" Okay, so his idea is to promote free association. He might say, let's try to understand the meaning of that remark. Oh, okay, that promotes collaboration. Or his other example is, we need to know more about why the feeling of intimacy makes you freeze up, rather than "Why did you stop talking?" See, Paul Gray says, "Do you notice that you stopped talking?" See, so that's not a bad idea. Okay, So here's an example of an interpretation. Quote, "I've noticed that it seems important to you that I just listen and not say anything. How can we understand this?" Okay, okay, that's not an interpretation. Okay, another one. Quote, "Arguing together seems to be easier for us than relating in a more positive way. We need to understand how this mode of relating becomes so easy for us to fall into." Okay, another one. Quote, "Are you aware that you tend to turn to me as a child turns to a parent with the expectation that I will know better than you know what is best for you? Let's work on exploring why you tend to leave yourself out of this process." Okay, quote, "You would prefer to continue to drink in my words and to remain my nursing child, but these are interpretations and I'm your analyst. Let us try to understand why you take in only the pleasure of my words rather than their meaning." Okay, another one. So this woman here, Marcia, she had to go to extraordinary lengths to ensure that she would be rejected by men. Quote, "You want to stay connected to me during the break, but you do it in a way that ensures that I, too, will reject you." Okay, quote, just like how your mother and father split up." Quote, the client says, "That's right, just like that. My father didn't have to leave town just because he left my mother." Okay, starts to cry. "He didn't have to abandon me like that." Quote, "I guess I expect a lot of myself." Okay, now this might be a predictable response to an interpretation, or, quote, the client might say, "So you think I'm hard on myself?" Okay, now in our view, it's better to say, "Well, it had crossed my mind," rather than debate about the negative transference. Okay, now the client wanted to quit therapy. The therapist said, "I'm the guardian of I'm the guardian of your real self. I do feel entitled to speak up for what's best for the treatment process. Now, what weight you give to what I'm saying in this deliberation is, of course, up to you." Okay, is the client in a place that enables him to receive an interpretation? Are we, quote, stealing the client's thunder, usurping an emergent realization to feed our sense of interpretive pride? Does the intervention set up a power struggle that could obscure rather than facilitate the analytic process? Okay, so these are just some general sort of thoughts. I put them all together. There isn't a full, complete interpretation here, but there were some sort of interpretive sort of elements to these examples. I won't go over them. I'll leave it for your review here. But I like this first one here. Instead of saying what triggered you or what happened or why, you just say, well, let's try to understand the meaning of what you just said. Oh, okay. It does feel like there's more mutuality there, right? How can we? I noticed this. How can we understand this together? It seems that we fall into this pattern of arguing rather than communicating in a positive way. We need to understand how this mode of relating becomes so easy for us to fall into. So that would lead to the interpretation that the parents were always arguing. So she recreates that in the here and now. Okay, and then the one about projecting the good parent. Sometimes we project the good parent onto our friend or the therapist. Are you aware that you tend to turn me? You tend to turn to me as a child turns to a parent with the expectation that I'll know better than what's best for you. Let's explore this. Why do you leave yourself out of your own decision-making process? Okay, so see, that leads to what happened in childhood. You see, these kinds of open-ended, collaborative kind of statements facilitate. So let me change my preface. These statements here, TQ 1259, these are the types of things that might facilitate leading towards the interpretive process. And then he said a couple of examples here. I like this one here. He says, you know, she said that she wants to quit, and he says, you know, that's you're leaving prematurely. Let's look at this. Well, no, I got something else to do. Well, I feel entitled to speak up for what's best for your treatment. And you know, she said, you just want to make money, don't you? Well, well, what weight you give, the weight you give, what weight you give what I'm saying in this deliberation is, of course, up to you. You know, so giving the power to the client. But he wants to say his side, and then, of course, they decide. Now, he can interpret why they're quitting. You know, so much anxiety is coming up. The way to deal with the anxiety is to run away. Why don't you stay and face what's and talk about it, right? That's what we're here for, right? And the one about the timing. He said some clients, some therapists are proud of their skill in making interpretations, but then that robs the client of coming up, discovering it himself. Okay, a light example of all this. A simple example of all this was in the TV show, a sitcom from the 50s and 60s. This was just a comedy show, a lighthearted family comedy sitcom about a teenage couple. So in this episode, two teenagers were planning to get married, and their parents were worried about it. The parents of the potential groom and the parents of the potential bride, they were all in a panic about it. But finally, the young dating couple came to their senses. The guy said to the four parents, "Don't worry, guys, we're not going to be married. We never seriously considered setting up a home of our own." And his girlfriend said, "You know, subconsciously, we were clinging to the nest." And her boyfriend says, "You know, and therefore, we're not mature enough for marriage." So the 18-year-old, she says, "You know, unconsciously we're clinging to the nest. You know, that means we're not mature enough." That was a great little scene, I thought. And then, you know, the mothers of the two, the mother of the guy and the mother of the young woman, they started to cry because they realized that how mature their teenage children were, and they're now adults. So they cried because they lost their children. So they did grow up and become adults, actually, right? Okay, that was TQ 1260. 1261. Okay, the midlife client in search for their psychological birth is finally in a position to search for the genuine riches of self-discovery, to earn their own opinions rather than to live off the wealth of prior knowledge. The young analyst embarking upon a career is typically an intrepid explorer, energized by the dazzling new psychic vistas opening ahead. Each new case is a privileged journey of discovery. Okay, so this is a common metaphor. The inner journey, the inner work. A person is an internal explorer, an internal astronaut, right? Opening up new psychic vistas, and he's an explorer, right? So the Odyssey is like that. The movie Hidden Fortress. Any movie that's based on a mythological epic. That's the inner journey, right? Myths and fairy tales are true on the inside, right? Myths and fairy tales describe the inner world. So all of these explorers, right? We're talking about the inner world. And these fantasized personifications of characters, they represent our memories, our childhood memories. So the seductress is the mother being promising. The rejecting mother, that's the witch, and so on. The good mother, that's the fairy godmother, and so on. And maybe the wise old man, that's the times when one of the parents or both of the parents wanted to see their child succeed. So we're facing the internal object relations world. Now things get twisted and turned, right? Like as explained in this next one. The client confronts his own features reflected in other people's eyes, rearranged as in a funhouse mirror, bloated here, compressed there, the whole twisted and turned and lit with pre-verbal memories. That was his metaphor of the labyrinth or the Gordian knot of the insecure attachment style, the arrested development, the relational trauma, pre-verbal trauma, intergenerational trauma. Things get stuck here, and we add memories on it, then it gets obscured, and we use defense mechanisms over it. Then we use other defense mechanisms to mask over those defense mechanisms, and so on. Then it's like an onion. So it's a lot of work, right? This whole being our own existential detective is a lot of work, right? In that, I love Huckabee's film. They were existential detectives. Okay, interpretation aims at positing dynamic linkages between two or more elements of action, memory, thought, and emotion. Psychoanalysis is an emotional involvement that stimulates and provokes both partners of the relationship, but maintains as its primary goal explication of the internal world and adaptive struggle of the client. Clients do not cause or create regressions in the analyst, though they may well stimulate and provoke them unconsciously. A prerequisite for maintaining our emotional balance while working with countertransference is a self-analytic consciousness. At these times, the restoration of neutrality, empathy, and a balanced interpretive perspective becomes the primary function of the analysis of countertransference. He's saying if the therapist is triggered himself, he's not to think that the client caused that. The client may have was the trigger or said something that triggered it. Right? So the therapist is responsible for his emotions. Right? So he has to analyze himself and come back to balance. And that's what he's saying here. But the overall goal is to explicate and to clarify, okay, the internal world. We live in two worlds, the internal world and the external world. How are we doing here? Yeah, it's a sunny day today. Sorry, I've got quite a glare here. Okay, let's wrap it up here. The psyche defends itself against painful memories, okay? The unconscious rises autonomously to greet us in the form of projection onto others. That's a good follow-up to projection, is the vehicle of making the unconscious conscious. The last one here. From the psychoanalytic point of view, the manifest character of the repetition compulsion is not important, but rather the psychic mechanisms, okay, the internal object relations world, the psychic reality, the psychic mechanisms which motivate it. When the psychic mechanisms revealed by therapy become familiar to the person, what has been intuitive understanding becomes a conscious recognition of the forces involved. He's saying we sort of know that we're projecting and that we're being loyal to the mother, or we're trying to show up the mother, or that we're angry at the parents, or we're trying to separate from the parents, but we're afraid to. He says a lot of these we sort of know, but we don't really know. So there's an intuitive knowing of our internal object relations world, but it's all pre-verbal. The therapist's job is to add words to it. Okay, our theme song is Katja Epstein's rendition of the song Windmills of the Mind.
Nachts, wenn die Straßen plötzlich still sind Stadt auf einmal schweigt, wenn aus steinernen Kaminen stumm der Mond zum Himmel steigt, wenn es hier in meinem Zimmer leer und einsam wird um mich, such ich in den dunklen Schatten die Erinnerung an dich und ich fühle, wie ein Augenblick zur Ewigkeit gerinnt, wenn das Spinnrad meiner Träume links zerrissene Fäden spinnt und sich leis zu drehen beginnt, wie sich Mühlen drehen im Wind. Und es kreisen die Gedanken ohne Anfang, ohne Ziel, wie die schnellen Wellenringe, wenn ein Stein ins Wasser fiel, wie ein Kreisel, den die Peitsche übers Straßenpflaster treibt, wie Spiralen, die ein Adler in den Abendhimmel schreibt. Und ich fühle, wie ein Augenblick zur Ewigkeit gerinnt, wenn das Spinnrad meiner Träume links zerrissene Fäden spinnt und sich leis zu drehen beginnt, wie sich Mühlen drehen im Wind. Tausend Fragen ohne Antwort, tausend Fragen ohne Sinn. Warum flog für uns der Sommer wie ein Pfeil so schnell dahin? Hat der Herbstwind gar die Spuren unserer Liebe schon verweht? Wenn erst weiße Flocken fallen, ist es dann für uns zu spät. Sah ich eben nicht im Dunkel deinen Schatten an der Tür, hoffte für ein paar Sekunden, du gibst doch zurück zu mir. Doch warum sich selbst belügen? Längst ist meinem Herzen klar, dass der Pulsschlag dieser Hoffnung nur mein eigener Schatten war. Und ich fühle, wie der Augenblick zur Ewigkeit gerinnt, wenn das Spinnrad meiner Träume links zerrissene Fäden spinnt und sich leis zu drehen beginnt, sich im Kreis zu drehen beginnt, wie sich Mühlen drehen im Wind, wie sich Mühlen drehen im Wind.
Okay, so thank you very much. This has been TQ 1259 to 1263. If anyone does have more information about this first topic here, about if child raising practices did change with the advent of agriculture, I'd be very interested to hear from you. Likewise, if there's any information about how babies were raised before the advent of agriculture, I'd be interested to follow up on that. And likewise, if there's any information about the interplay of dopamine and serotonin in the child rearing process. Okay, so we just covered some sort of lighthearted material about the interpretive process. Let's try to understand the meaning of that remark. That's a nice sort of friendly thing to say, rather than, why did you, right? Or you say, I've noticed this, how can we understand this? I noticed open-ended questions, I've noticed, let's work together, let's try to understand this, what do you, that kind of thing. This one was interesting here about the person didn't care about the interpretations. The therapist said, you would prefer to continue to drink in my words and to remain my nursing child, but these are interpretations, and I am your analyst. Let us try to understand why you take in only the pleasure of my words rather than their meaning. So the example there was the client didn't care about the content, didn't care about the interpretations. She just liked being in the therapist's presence. She liked hearing his voice and his words. It was soothing. It's as if she's replaying the pleasurable experience of the nursing experience, right? Words as milk. So the therapist the client just wants to hear the words, and it's like it's milk from the unconscious perspective. The person's not analytically thinking. What do you mean by that interpretation? Well, can I correct you? No, that's not. They're not even caring what's. Maybe it's like a song. You don't really care about the words. You just want to hear the music. Something like that. But in the therapy process, you want to pay attention to what's being said. You want to build your ego. Because if you pay attention, the goal is to make the unconscious conscious. But she doesn't want to be conscious. She just wants to sit there and milk in the sound of his soothing voice, let's say, or maybe he has a calming, reassuring tone and he has a nice attitude. The client just wants to milk in that experience. So that's a pre-verbal, that's a very early stage. That needs to be interpreted. Are you aware of what you're doing? See, you want to make that conscious. You don't just want to collude with that, because that's Sisyphus. A person can do that forever. A person can remain in that mode their whole lives. Like Sisyphus, it can't be done. No adult in the present can be that good breast and travel back in a time machine and be that good breast that was needed. The idea is to mourn the loss of the good breast mother experience, right? Not just try to get it as an adult. You got to talk about it and mourn it. So either we repeat and don't remember, like Sisyphus, or we talk about it and we remember and we mourn and then achieve the psychological birth through the mourning process, right? So he's a good therapist to point that out if that's what she's doing. And there was one example here where he didn't interpret the transference. He just simply said, it had crossed my mind. He didn't want to. The one about I like this one. What weight you give what I'm saying in our discussion is of course up to you. I thought that was an empowering statement. I think that's a good one there. So she said, sorry, I'm going to quit, and let's talk about it. No, I don't want to talk about it. Well, I'd like to talk about it. What weight you give to what I'm about to say in this deliberation is, of course, up to you. So he was trying to, I would assume he would interpret that too much anxiety came up, and to deal with the anxiety, to soothe away the anxiety, would be to flee the therapy process. Instead of doing that, what got triggered? Talk about that. Reassociate. Right? So he would say, let's try to understand the meaning of your now saying that you want to quit. What's the meaning of that? Okay, and the one about the TV show, the sitcom there. That's a great little scene. That's a great little, the two teenagers decided that they were not going to get married because they realized, since they didn't really plan about where they were going to live, they concluded, they analyzed themselves. They subconsciously were clinging to the parents, and therefore they're not mature enough to get married. So that was a mature. So they were sort of midway there, right? And then the parents started crying when they heard that. At midlife, you find things for yourself. Okay. we're the inner explorer, we're the inner astronaut of the psychic world, dazzling new psychic vistas. Okay, in the projection, things get twisted, like in a funhouse mirror, he says here. Interpretation links things. Remember, in trauma, the links are broken. The thoughts, the feelings, the memories, they're all compartmentalized. Right? When there's trauma, the mind that associates things and makes links between cause and effect, this because of this, and this links to this, that gets all broken. So the therapy is putting Humpty Dumpty back together, making the links, right? Penelope is sewing, making the links. Interpretations are bringing things together. So that's the therapist's skill, to make those links. Okay, so I'll just leave it here. So thank you very much. More to follow. Bye for now.